Billy Napier said something today I wasn't expecting, and it really has me encouraged about this weekend's game. It is obviously no secret that UF has been pretty bad away from the swamp under Napier. The only win that Napier has in his entire UF career away from Gainesville was Texas A&M last season, which I guess when you think about it, it's kind of wild that that one win is a pretty decent Texas A&M team, but I digress. In his press conference today, he shared that he's changing things up in hopes that UF will get off to a quicker start against South Carolina, which we need to happen if Florida is going to beat the Gamecocks. Take a look at his press conference right here.
Bottom line is when the ball's spotted, we kick it off. Okay, you've got to be ready to mix it up, and if you've done a good job preparing all week, you're mentally prepared. You can communicate at a high level. You can play fast. You can anticipate. And then physically, you got to have a sharp sword.
So he mentioned the slow starts on the road, and UF has had a lot of slow starts. Just think about this season. Utah. UF went 3 and out twice, while Utah scored a touchdown on their very first play on offense. The Gators only got 3 points in the first half. The offense kind of started clicking in the second half of that game, but at that point, it was too little too late. This is not really an offense that's built to come from behind, at least not by a lot, right? So they were kind of doomed to begin with because of that slow start against Utah. And then we go to Kentucky. We punted 4 times and then had an interception in our first 5 possessions. Meanwhile, Kentucky scored on their first 4 possessions. So we just were really incredibly slow on both sides of the ball to begin the game. And again, same thing as the Utah game. It was just too little too late at the end there. It really didn't matter what UF would have done. They dug themselves such a hole that they just couldn't possibly get out of it. We did kind of start a little bit slow against Vanderbilt in Tennessee. We gave up touchdowns to both of them early in that game. But at home in the swamp, they were able to bounce back. And those 7 points weren't enough to keep Florida from being able to dig themselves out. They were fine. They bounced back quickly. They made adjustments quickly. And then obviously were able to dominate both of those games by halftime. So why is that? Why do we start so slowly on the road? And what can be done to fix it? Well, Napier mentioned what he's going to try to do to counter it today.
Yeah, no, I think, we're going to try to get to Columbia a little bit earlier this week. We're tweaking our schedule on Thursday. We're going to put a huge emphasis on sleep Wednesday night. And then, things that, just little things. I think we're going to arrive to the stadium a little earlier. All these things are typical quality control, that we do.
So he's talking about typical quality control, changing up the schedule, what they're going to do to, see what can make a difference on these slow starts. They're talking about getting to Columbia a little bit earlier. Maybe if the guys get up there, earlier in the day, they can have a chance to get a little bit more adjusted. They really want to focus on sleep on Wednesday night, make sure that these guys are getting the rest that they need, the recovery that they need from practice earlier in the week so that they go into this game fully recharged. They're going to get to the stadium a little bit earlier on game day, which is interesting to me because that means shuffling around a lot of things. Gator Walk happens 2.5 hours before kickoff, no matter what stadium Florida's playing in, swamp or away. So this is going to be a change this week. And if you're going to the game, pay attention for when they announce when Gator Walk is, if that's something you're going to attend, because it's going to be earlier than it has previously been. And I think these are going to be interesting things to try. Urban Meyer was a really big stickler for routine. He had what's called a 48-hour rule. 48 hours before kickoff, you were not allowed to be out with your friends. You were not allowed to be partying. You were not allowed to be doing anything but being dialed in and focused on the matter at hand, the game that was coming up. There was a curfew. So the last time any of these players did anything was Wednesday, right? because they needed to be ready and focused and prepared for the task at hand. It was something that he found incredibly important. Routine was something that he hit home a lot. You're going to eat your meal X number of hours before the game starts. We're going to arrive at the stadium at this. We're going to, try all these different things. So, Napier is interested in seeing what happens if we do something different. What we've been doing isn't working. So let's see if we can shuffle the schedule around a little bit and if it makes an impact on these players and how prepared they are. But it's not just what Napier thinks, which is good. He spoke about taking the pulse of the team, taking the pulse of the players before making these decisions. Listen to this clip.
And I think ultimately there's a pulse from the players that you got to take into account, right? So most of it's mental, you know. I do think that, I just met with the accountability group at 11, and we talked about mentally being prepared, physically being prepared, but also emotionally being prepared. You got to anticipate and visualize what it's going to be like, that it will be challenging. There'll be ups and downs in the game. Our dialogue during the week about being prepared to respond, offense supporting defense, defense supporting offense, and playing really good in the kicking game.
Wanting the team to be prepared mentally, physically, emotionally, which honestly, this is key because at times this team hasn't looked like any of those things. This team has looked weak mentally, emotionally, and honestly, even physically at times to me. There were moments where it just didn't look like they had a clue against Utah and Kentucky. And sometimes this is really hard to put into words and explain on these videos because I'm not saying this team does not have heart. This team does. But having heart and seeming mentally and physically and emotionally tough and prepared are honestly different things. So when I talk about this, I want to be clear. This team wants to win. This team has heart, but there are just times when they don't look like they are mentally or emotionally or physically fully prepared or tough enough for the task at hand. And that is something that Napier has to continue to figure out. Some of it is youth, right? Some of it is more game experience, more practice experience, more just college experience in general is going to help those things. But some of it is preparation. So recognizing that and wanting to try to do something to make that better is huge. When he was then asked about what the team needs to do on the field to get off quicker starts, his answer here was a little more indirect. And I don't think he wanted to throw any one player or any one unit under the bus, which is very much the Napier way. He is not the person that is going to stand in a press conference and call people out by name for not doing their job. And I think that's something that all of us really appreciate Napier for. Okay, now what can UF do to get off to quicker starts on the road? First of all, more pressure on defense. We have talked about this on the channel the entire season long. It may lead to more mistakes. It is a risk to bring more pressure on defense, to move faster, to be flying around more. I think that it's a risk worth taking, though. This team needs more pressure on the quarterback, more sacks, more hurries, more chaos and disruption. That only happens when you kick it up another gear. I think this team has this, but I think sometimes they're afraid to use it. I think that they are worried about being technically sound. I think they're worried about procedures and penalties and things like that. And I get all of that. But they've got to bring more pressure. They've got to bring more chaos. And I think they can. They also need to mix it up a little bit on offense. Don't be so predictable. I think they did a little better of job against Vanderbilt than they had the previous couple of games in this, but we can even do more. You just can't be predictable. If us as fans can tell what is coming next, then absolutely the team Florida is playing, no matter who it is, whether it's South Carolina, Missouri down the road, Georgia, LSU, whoever, they're going to be able to tell too. And you can't go 3 and out, particularly not to start this game. This is not a team that is built to come from behind. So when you start out with multiple 3 and outs, you put yourself behind the 8 ball and make it a lot harder to come home with a victory. And listen, when you don't go 3 and out, when you get pressure, when you do the things we're talking about, you get the crowd out of it, or at least not as much in it as they would be otherwise. And that is important. Napier was asked about crowd noise and he kind of downplayed it a little bit. But let me tell you something, it is real. In 2005, Florida needed to get a victory at Williams-Brice Stadium to clinch the SEC East and send them to the SEC championship game. This was Urban's first season. This was my husband's junior year. I can tell you, we were back in Gainesville with the kegs ready for a party to celebrate what we thought was going to be a ticket to the SEC championship game. Well, Florida lost to South Carolina and Steve Spurrier that night. And when you talk to the guys that played in that game and played at that stadium, they will tell you that it is a wild environment. And, a player just told me today, you might not expect this from South Carolina. You go in, the stadium doesn't necessarily look intimidating. A lot of times, South Carolina isn't a team that is playing for a whole lot towards the end of the season. But those fans show up. They are loud, they are aggressive, and they make a difference in these games. So Florida needs to figure out a way to quiet the crowd early. You do that by being dominant. You do that by causing chaos. You do that by scoring points. Those are the things that are going to help you take that wild crowd out of it. And it is a piece of the puzzle. It's something the Gators need to do. Okay, so why are Billy Napier's statements from today a good thing overall? I think that it shows us that Napier is willing to adjust. This has been one of the biggest things that Gator fans have talked about this season. Is Napier going to be the type of coach who is willing to recognize things that need to be changed and then make the adjustments to be successful? And I really think his statements today kind of are a really good sign for the future in a lot of areas, because I think you're either a person who is set in their ways or you are a person who is open to change, who is open to adapting. And he showed us today that he thinks maybe there is a different way to do things or a better way to do things. So it's not about, is he willing to be flexible on what time the team leaves for Columbia or what time they eat a meal or show up at the stadium? It's the fact that he's willing to adjust or be flexible at all. It shows that he recognizes there might be a better way of doing things out there, and he's going to research and look into it and see if it's something that will work for the team. I think that it's a good sign for the future. It gives me some hope that there will be changes made for the long term in other areas. Because again, you are either the type of person who are set in your ways, or you are the type of person who is willing to adapt, who is willing to do things differently. And I think we're finding that Billy Napier is going to be the latter. This game is huge for the Gators and for Napier's tenure. You can either go into this bye week at 5-2 or 4-3. 5-2 is really, honestly, the best that a lot of us could have asked for going into this season. I think if you had told people in July the Gators are going into the Florida-Georgia game 5-2, most of us would be pretty excited. So, we can take that. 4-3, not so much the same, especially when you consider the games coming down the stretch. It's going to be hard to find victories left on the schedule just because it's filled with a lot of really good teams. Are you going to beat LSU? Are you going to beat Florida State? Are you going to beat Georgia? Those are all really, really hard games. You've got Missouri, you've got South Carolina. Let's see what Florida can get done against those teams. You've got Arkansas at home. Hopefully they can take care of business there. But step one, South Carolina, last week before the bye, last game before Florida, Georgia. It's a big one. 5-2 would be huge for this young team. It would be a huge shot in the arm going into a massive game against Georgia. But not only that, UF has their toughest 2 conference games directly after the bye week. We have Georgia and LSU in back-to-back weeks, both away from the swamp. And listen, I am not trying to be doom and gloom. You guys know that I am a sunshine pumper at heart, but you're going to be an underdog in both of those games. So this is the difference in possibly maintaining, above 500 or not. This is big. This game is huge for bowl eligibility as well. If you lose it, you're going to need to pull off an upset somewhere down the stretch to make a bowl. Are you going to be able to beat Arkansas? Maybe. Are you going to be able to beat Missouri away? If you can't beat South Carolina away, I don't know that there's a whole lot of reason to think you can beat Missouri away. Are you going to beat LSU on the road? Are you going to upset Florida State in the swamp? You want to get those wins to get you bowl eligible as quickly as possible because the gauntlet is coming. What do you think? Will Napier's changes impact anything? Are you more hopeful heading into this South Carolina game than you were before? And do you think that maybe Napier's comments are indicative of his personality in general and things that could come in the offseason, his ability to adapt? Let me know in the comments down below. We've got a bunch of content coming this week, a lot, guys. So stay locked in with the channel here. Hit that subscribe button. Make sure that you are getting alerts from us. We appreciate all of the support that you guys give us. And if you missed yesterday's video breaking down the win against Vanderbilt, you can watch that by clicking right here.